Boards don't know that they are liable first. A CEO is technically an employee. So boards don't know that they are liable first financially if something goes wrong.
You're listening to Nonprofits Today, the podcast that showcases the incredible impact nonprofits have in our ever-changing world. The podcast that gets the pulse on today's economic, social, political, and humanitarian climate straight from frontline leaders, innovative changemakers, and courageous risk takers in our communities and around the globe. And now, without further ado, here's your host, Sarah Box.
Welcome to this episode of Nonprofits Today. I'm Sarah Box, your host, and today's guest is Thana Hickman-Simmons, founder and executive director of Viola's House in Dallas, Texas. And what started out as a mentoring program that Viola started has evolved into this life-changing residential and community-based organization supporting thousands of families, all the way from transitional housing to being the largest diaper distributor in the county. And Viola's House is redefining actually what it means to serve with heart and lead with purpose. And before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about the challenges in the nonprofit sector right now with all the uncertainty on funding. So let's just dive right in and formally welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, it was great to read about Viola's House, how it started small, but that you've kept expanding it. So what inspired you, first of all, to create Viola's House?
Absolutely. I was a teen mom at the age of 17, and then I became a teen bride. So if you can imagine, I heavily depended on the village. Once I felt like I got a little stable with my career, with my kids, I wanted to find a way to give back to that demographic because the village was so important in how I was able to be successful in corporate. So I just wanted to start with some curriculum, some training for teen moms, but that wasn't the case. I quickly learned right after starting and meeting with my first group of teen moms that a lot of them faced homelessness when they were told of the news of an unplanned pregnancy. And I thought to myself, I was never homeless as a teen mom. I cannot imagine if I didn't have stable housing. So I've got to provide stable housing for them so that they can even digest the curriculum and the programming.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I started in one apartment with 2 beds. That very first week, I had 10 applicants. I knew that I was given an answer to a problem here on earth.
So how did folks find out about you?
So that's what's interesting about our clients for a residential program. We have never done any client-facing advertising. We released a soft press release, and we let the other shelters in the area know that this shelter was unique for moms who were faced with an unplanned pregnancy. At that time, we were housing age 17 to 21. So it was only a 4-year demographic here. And so we were very, very specific that they had to be pregnant or have just had a baby or in their postpartum period, which I like to call the 4th trimester. So we were very specific with that. And it turns out that there was a need for it all across the county. And so we immediately start receiving applicants.
So how did you figure out, I mean, you started with one space, one apartment, right? So, but then I can imagine if you had 10 applicants right away, there's a need for you to have more apartments. So when you first started out, how did you fund your work? Like, what were you just having, quote unquote, the village help donate to it, or did you have grants, or how did you start it?
Lots of donations, no grants, and I was in corporate and I funded it personally. So the apartment was donated, which was the first line of support from Cornerstone Baptist Church. And so everything else that was needed for the program when I first started I used volunteers. I had people do diaper drives. And the financial part, I supported myself for the first, I would say, 3 or so years. Mm-hmm.
So how many folks were you able to help before you had to start growing bigger?
Oh my goodness. I ended up in that first year growing to 3 apartments in the
Wow.
very first year because that's how many applicants we were receiving. There were times where we were just overran, right? What was supposed to sound good as a maternity home ended up becoming a maternity shelter.
Wow.
There was some months where I had moms sleeping on the couch because they were pregnant and I couldn't have them on the streets. So between 3 apartments, I would typically house between those 3 apartments about 10 moms at a time.
And how long did they stay with you?
The average stay in those apartments was 6 months. That was the average stay. Now, keep in mind, when I opened the first apartment, we had just been donated a house. The house was dilapidated. And while I'm running the apartments, I'm also raising the funds to complete the renovations of this house because that was our main facility where I knew I could hold 12 residents under one roof. So I was doing a construction project, working in corporate, raising my kids. I have 3 daughters who are now adults. I was married at the time. Obviously, I'm not married anymore because who's going to put up with that kind of life? And I was running this program with volunteers when I first started getting staff. That is the point where I continue to scale to provide better services, better case management, and getting social workers in. And so that's when we start growing, and we have just been growing ever since. Right now, we have a full-time staff of 56.
Whoa, that's a lot.
In the last 10 years, we have housed hundreds of mothers' babies. We have one of the largest social service agencies for mothers who are pregnant or parenting a child under the age of 3 in the county. We gave out over 6 million diapers last year. We give diapers until a child is 3 years old. We educate right now through our social service agency over 500 mothers a day. We have 2 maternity homes. We're doing construction on a third. And we have one of the most beautiful baby boutiques where moms who take educational classes earn baby bucks to shop to get what they need for their babies in this boutique. But outside of that, we give free diapers if you are signed up in our program at all. You can get diapers every 2 weeks until your child is 3 years old. And we give enough diapers to last for 2 weeks.
That's, if folks haven't recently had a child, diapers are super expensive.
They are.
They are. They really are. And when you think about disposable income, and if you're on the edge of being tossed out of your house for being pregnant, I mean, I can't imagine, especially as a teen or a young person, how overwhelming that would feel.
Yeah.
And so just to have you be someone, it's almost like these arms around you going, okay, we got you. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
I've been there. It's all good. We got you.
Yeah.
Except that you had a village, so you are now that village for these young moms.
But Sarah, I was there. When people come and look at the programming, the great thing is my lived experience because I was a teen mom, a teen bride, and then I had 2 more babies. I got married at 19. So by 22, I had 3 daughters. Can you imagine how much help and support I needed while I was finishing my degree and working to feed my daughters?
A lot.
So a lot of the programming that I start is due to my lived experience. It's not based on research. It is just me completely understanding this demographic, better than most by having 3 children by the age of 22 and continuing the steps to better myself. If I had a boutique where I could get the cutest clothes, shoes, strollers, everything I need for my kids, I would have took those classes. If I had free diapers and pull-ups, because my last 2 are 14 months apart, so I had one in pull-ups, one in diapers, I would have been able to put so much money back into my household. So when I think about the fact that I completely understand what these mothers are going through, it's my lived experiences that causes me to keep expanding programming and to keep meeting this critical need that we have right here in one of the poorest zip codes in Dallas.
Well, something you said there about like you had your young kids. You're pretty young. I mean, 22. I know when we're 22, we think we're not young, but we really are.
Yeah. Compared to now, I'm pretty old now. So.
Well, we think we know everything.
Yeah.
I remember being 21, 22, thinking I had it all figured out, and then you go, maybe not.
Yeah.
So, but because of your own experience and how you show up, do any of these young women say, hey, I could continue my education while I'm raising this kid? And do they see you as a role model in that way?
Absolutely. A lot of them. And while I don't get the opportunity to do as much client-facing work as I used to, my office is still inside of the maternity home. And so I get to see it up close and personal every day. Still, I'm not servicing the clients, but I work with my door open. And a lot of people always ask me why. It is my motivation to keep doing the work behind the scenes, to keep the lights on, to keep the staff with a paycheck so that they can serve in excellence. Every time I see a mother walk past my office door carrying her newborn or with a big old belly, it's my motivation as to why we're here and why we have to keep going.
Well, that was one of the things is that you have a vision for empowering young moms towards self-sufficiency, so being there and helping them get to where they need to be.
Yeah.
And then do they stay part of the community after they've left you?
Yeah, that is the blessing in having a social service agency, because even if they leave the maternity home with a 6-month-old baby, they continue to come for educational classes, diapers, clothing, all of those things where we have the continuum of care. We also have a partner clinic on site, HHM, where they can continue to go to their maternal health appointments, pediatric appointments. All of those things help us keep up with those mothers for 3 years, which is what we want to do, right?
Yep.
We want to see that if we placed them in an apartment, if we've helped them with their job search and they have obtained employment, that they are able to continue on that path. So we definitely stay connected. We definitely continue to offer the educational classes and the support of the staff that they need along the way.
Well, especially for those first 3 years. I mean, those are big developmental years in children.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when moms are super stressed, it's really hard for them to help their child develop, right? And that's just normal.
Yeah.
It's just normal. But we were chatting a bit about you being stressed with all the changes in funding. So before we talk about the changes or let's say the shifting landscape where there's a lot of unknowns, tell me how today's Viola's house is funded. Like, do you have grants? Do you have partners? Like, you've got the medical center and all these. Do they pay for themselves? What's your structure like?
So we have multiple streams of funding. Right now, our government funding is our largest source state. And that is about 68% of our funding right now. And so if you can imagine, there is a lot going on, even with grants. So last year we had a really good grant year. When you look at the foundations, we're being told that they're receiving 4 times the amount of applicants that they have ever received. And so their decision-making process is more difficult than ever before. Households right now in the U.S. is seeing an increase of $3,800 a year to their household expenses, which means our individual donors, that number is going down. And we saw it last month, it went down 34% for individual donors. So all of our streams of income that we so heavily depend on has really taken a hit. We see it clear as day from our first quarter. We had one of the lowest first quarters that we've seen in 4 years, right? Between grants and receiving a no for grants, our individual giving has gone down because people are concerned about their households. The people that can afford to give are deciding to tuck more money away because they don't know what's going to happen with the economy and with their investments. And so right now, the nonprofits that serve the most vulnerable in the community are the ones that are feeling the impact from the current state of the economy. We're feeling the impact. I just read an article the other day that said in the last 70 days, over 10,000 people in the nonprofit arena have lost their jobs. Can you imagine what that does to our community? These are people that serve the community, whether they are client-facing, admin, executive. Right. This is the functionality of nonprofits is people. And if we lose the people to serve the community, then the community is at a loss because they aren't able to receive the service. And then we have households at a loss. And then you start looking at the health of that household, the health of the people in the household. How do they get fresh food? How do they get transportation to get to their healthcare appointments, especially during their pregnancy and postpartum? How are the babies getting to the doctor? So it is certainly a trickle effect all the way from the top, from the federal level, all the way down to a household of a single mother with 2 kids under the age of 3 that heavily depends on programs like Viola's House. It is definitely a trickle effect, and it then becomes all of our problem in community. Because what we can't do is have communities failing and city shelters overran because families cannot maintain their household.
I don't know about your area, but I know where I live, which is definitely not the size of your county or the Dallas area. But over the last 4 or 5 years, our housing prices have gone up, right? So it prices people out of the rental market pretty much. And even if you were to sell a house and wanted to stay in the area, what you could buy now wouldn't be the value of a house that might be 30, 40 years old. So, I mean, it is hard. And then the uncertainty makes people pause. I think when you mentioned that, like, they don't know what to do, so they're holding on to their money longer. So I've always been kind of this champion of sustainability. Like, even when economics are good and people say nonprofits aren't supposed to have a profit, nonprofits should have a healthy reserve, right, for moments like this.
A healthy reserve. If you are a long-standing nonprofit, you typically have endowment. Healthy nonprofits have investments and things of that nature, so that when you hit hard times with the economy, you can start going to the things that you put in place for the hard times, because it's not a matter of if it happens as a nonprofit, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. So in your good seasons as a nonprofit, it is very important. Make good investments with property, right? Property has equity. In most nonprofits, their greatest assets is real estate. And if you think about it, the problem now is a lot of grassroots nonprofits, they had real estate donated to them, or they're utilizing someone else's real estate as an office to work out of. And so I tell nonprofits all the time, if you get into a position to where you can actually purchase the building that you're working out of, that is an asset that you have, and that is collateral that you have during a tough season so that you can keep your operations going. So I think one of the things nonprofits have to do is focus on the business side. Because again, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, your season, your tough season. It is a matter of when it's going to happen. Seasons don't last always.
No, they
And
don't.
I've been trying to encourage the nonprofit leaders to say, listen, this is a season. And if you can weather through this season and get to the other side, then you have likely weathered through one of the toughest seasons your nonprofit will see, and you can do anything after that. You have just got to weather through it and keep those doors open.
I think folks are, when we hit that, and I know the last time was in
Mm-hmm.
08, 09, right?
Yes,
When we had all the
absolutely.
housing failures and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember people being really freaked out about it. And as business, same thing, like, can we keep our employees? And we had my partner and I had a conversation with our goal, right? And we thought, okay, if we don't have to lay anybody off, right? Because they all have families. They have young kids too,
Yeah.
right? They're working to serve people. So we thought, okay, that would be our success. Like, we make it through. We might not make much of a profit. It might be a tough year for us, but that would be awesome. Prior to that, it was like, how much reserves could we have?
Yeah.
But I also think once you get through that, you realize, just like you said, it's a season. It will come again because there's cycles.
Yeah.
You know, we can't pretend ourselves out of it. But I love how specific you were. If you can invest in real estate as an example, have you seen nonprofits in your area like come to people like you who have been around and they're successful saying,
Mm-hmm.
could we just come under your umbrella for a little while? Can you run us for a little while? Do you have agencies that are doing that?
We have a lot of requests right now. And it's interesting because I have not done any layoffs. I have not, we cut a little of our programming at the beginning of the year, because we were first advised in January of our first cuts, right? And so we looked at programming that we could cut, that was more, the programming was more often to maybe scale it to do it once or twice a month. So we looked at specific programs that we had to not cut staff, but cut some of the resources that were going out the door. We also looked at our second largest line item, which is supplies and material assistance for mothers, diapers, right? Can you imagine how much we spend in diapers? So one of the asks that we started asking people is, can you do a diaper drive for us to help save us on some of these expenses? So you look at your second largest line item after your payroll and say, okay, where can I make changes here? Then being really strategic and going through your budget. I think there is not one nonprofit that doesn't have something in their budget that is not necessarily a need, but a desire and a want of the nonprofit. For me, I'll be very transparent and tell all the listeners, I am big on sponsoring and giving to other nonprofits. And so I have a charitable donation line item in my budget, and my board approved it. So that's another area where I said, okay, look, as much as I want to support other nonprofits and grassroots and support their fundraisers, support their events, and we had given ourselves the budget to do that monthly, we had to cut that. So all of the requests that I had coming in, I said, listen, we are facing budget cuts, and this is one line item where I may not be able to support you for the next 12 to 18 months. And you know what? It's not a huge line item for the month, but when you look at it for the year, it's almost enough to put back into another area where you have maybe been lower in that area or where you're being affected by the cuts. So it makes a difference if you go through your budget very, very thoroughly and say, where can I start making cuts? Not with my payroll, but in these other areas first, right? Then it adds more money back into your payroll area to where you can really map out, okay, with my reserves, if I hit a hole, how long can I sustain? Another thing, Sarah, is then you start looking at your assets. Now, again, if we're talking grassroots nonprofits, some of them are saying, I don't have any assets. So what are you talking about? I don't have assets. But getting your assets assessed properly is really, really important, right? You want to look at the end of the year, things that nonprofits don't even look at as an asset is an asset. When you are in your good season and your cash flow is good, you need to always have in your financial policies and procedures how you can have lines of credit. Because if your tough season is one quarter, it is very possible that the bank that you're running your operations through can yield you a line of credit to make it through that tough season. Let me tell you something. There are so many ways to sustain, but closing your door cannot be the first option. So I have tons of nonprofits that are coming to me now. They've been coming to me, and I have to tell them, look, my degree is in business. I hire social workers. I'm not a social worker. And so I put on that business hat, and anything that you would do to sustain your household and the different variations of how you look at that as a CEO of a nonprofit, you have to look at that as well when you're going through your numbers and financials. These are important conversations right now because every day I get a notification that another nonprofit in Dallas is closing their doors. And they are critical nonprofits. Critical. I'm talking the nonprofit in Dallas that kept kids while the parents went to their cancer appointments for treatment had to close its doors. Think about that. Think about the impact of that. Think about Viola's house, where the moment we put a pack of diapers into a family's hands, that is money automatically back into their household for food, for utilities, right? So if you think about the impact of nonprofits closing their doors, if you are really here for a community, you've got to sit down with your board, sit down with some strategists, and really figure out how to make it through this season, because as long as you and I are breathing, seasons shift and change. Anytime we are at the end of winter, we see the worst winter storms towards the end, right before the break of spring. And spring will yield the most beautiful weather, the most beautiful sunny days. And that's how we have to look at this. The nonprofit community is in winter right now, but what comes after winter? Spring is coming. And to me, as much as I love summer, summer can get a little hot.
A little hot and humid.
Spring and fall, I'm from Chicago, so we got a fall, are my favorite two seasons. But think about it. One of my favorite seasons right after fall comes winter. Winter is everyone's least favorite season. But winter has to end at some point, and we've got to shift into another season. And that's where everybody has got to hold on tight through this winter.
You talked about having the difficult conversations, though, and I think it's easy for us to think, okay, if I just wait, I'll have this decision next month or the month after. But really making those choices sooner rather than later, or even before you're in trouble, right? Saying, if this comes.
You've got to be proactive, right? Even at the end of the year, one thing you said, Sarah, and I love that, right? When you said, people say nonprofits shouldn't have extra money in reserves. Well, that's not true. That's not true. That's like saying you shouldn't have an emergency fund for your home. And we all know that if you don't have an emergency fund for your home, if something happens, you risk losing your home.
Yeah, it's just one thing after the other.
Yeah, and so you've got to, and this is where building relationships with funders are important, because you will have some funders who look at your financials and they say, why is this sitting here? Right. And this is a nonprofit podcast, so I'm glad I can have this type of conversation.
This is what we need to say, though, because a lot of funders think, well, you've got too much money. And I'm thinking, the Optum, I mean, you should, I've done sustainability planning with folks. They say, well, we've got this much. I said, okay, look at your budget. How far will that go? Because you need to be prepared to tell everybody who relies on you, your doors are closing.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it only goes 2 months, those 2 months are going to be administrative months closing things down. And they go, well, we don't want that to happen. I said, okay, so let's look. What's the plan? And maybe you don't have to implement the plan.
And nonprofits, right? And that's why it's important that you have a board for real, right? Because a board that's their job. They need to look at your sustainability plan. They are financial oversight.
Yep.
They help the CEO with the financial planning. And so sustainability plans are important when you're submitting grants. A lot of people won't get funded for grants because they don't have a proper sustainability plan. And funders look at that. They say, if I'm going to give you $100,000 next month, does my investment go down the drain and 6 months later you're closed?
Right. And they know. They've been funding long enough to know if your budget's realistic.
Yeah.
You know, we can do all of this for $100,000, and they're thinking, it's a $750,000 ask you just made of us. You can't do it for $100,000.
Yeah.
But you talked about having a board who's a serious board. So I think, and this is tough, especially with grassroots, right? Because you start from a passion, a purpose. Yeah. And so the board members are typically in that place. And then it gets to where you need your board to step up. And I mean, it's just a stage of an organization. But sometimes the directors don't want the board more involved because they've been happy that things are just kind of going along, you know, and I think you have to engage your board, and they are there. They're important.
It's a catch-22. And this is another very important conversation, almost a whole nother podcast when you talk about grassroots and boards. I could talk for hours about this lived experience, right? You're right, Sarah. When you start grassroots, it's passion. A lot of times you ask those around you who you know and who are passionate, hey, join this board. They have no board training. They have no idea the role of the board. And so they are yes men. Hey, sign off on this budget. Hey, sign off on this. Yeah. And they're not reading anything. Boards don't know that they are liable first. A CEO is technically an employee. So boards don't know that they are liable first financially if something goes wrong. The first thing that the board should be looking at is the directors and officers' liability insurance to make sure they are covered so that they can feel free to operate in the role that they're there for. They can feel free to fundraise. They can feel free to do all of those things, right? But when you remain grassroots with your board, that is where you don't grow as an organization. And we all can raise our hands and say we made the mistake until we were sick of it. And say, why am I the only one advocating, raising money, right? When I finally got a decent board, my world and my mind was opened up. Was it difficult? Sarah, I had a board that came in 1 year and needed to revise bylaws because we were operating under a dated set that didn't even fit where the organization was anymore. We needed to look at a 5-year strategic plan, 10-year, 25, and right now we're working on a 100-year strategic plan. What does it look like when everybody who's here now, when our kids are no longer here? How does Viola's house still have footprints and their name here on this earth? Because it exists. You know how many nonprofits have been in existence for over 100 years? Right? So when you get a board that comes in, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work when you're doing that. When you are really focused on what our impact report looks like now, but what we want it to look like 5 years from now. We have to follow a strategic plan to do that. And that takes the strategic planning committee on the board. Your fundraising, if you don't want to be by yourself, that takes a fundraising committee on the board. Governance, when you're looking at bylaws and things like that, you need your governance committee on your board, which means you have to have people, professional people with skill sets and experience. And that's what gets hard for grassroots nonprofit leaders. One of the dangers that I encountered is we started growing. We started getting so much recognition. Everybody in Dallas knew who we were. My name is Thana. I would walk into a room, people would be like, that's Viola. I'm not even Viola, right? They just knew Viola's house. Well, what happens is you start attracting people who could care less about community. They want to sit on a board to be attached to a name, right? And so I went through that dangerous season as well, where we were getting so much recognition. We had people attached to the name, and I looked up and they had been on the board for months and had never even toured, Sarah. They had never even toured the maternity home where girls are living 24/7, which means you could come at 9 o'clock at night and actually get a full understanding of our impact. And so that's dangerous as well, because you want professionals that are committed to community, that won't try to run your day-to-day operations, because boards is our oversight, right? But who also share in the commitment of community. Yeah. It may not necessarily be that they share in your deep passion as a founder, but they share in your commitment to transform communities. If you get those people on the board and they don't understand that, they will put things in place that could be detrimental to the organization and change how you fulfill your mission. That's what you don't want to happen. And so again, this is a conversation I'm telling you, we talk about it often in our cohorts here in Dallas, and I have some amazing nonprofit circles, right? And we all share our experiences with boards. Right now, I can tell you that I probably have the best board that I've ever had. But it has been a seesaw of up and down as a founder. Had I been hired in, you probably would have, when you're hired in, you come into a board that is engaged because the board is who hires in the CEO, right? But when you are grassroots, you are going to go through a seesaw with your board. And I cannot ever say that you're going to have the perfect board, just like we never have the perfect marriage. Do you ever get 100% out of any one person in a relationship, in a marriage? No. So are you going to get 100% of what you want in a board? Probably not, right? Because everybody's values and views are different.
People are people. People are complex units.
Yeah. But it's important. It is really important, especially if you know that winter is going to come at some point, that you have a good board in place. One of the things I'm doing right now is really engaging my fundraising committee, transparency with the fundraising committee, right? Because the board may meet not as often, but direct communication with that fundraising committee to say, all right, listen, this is where we are with our reserves. This is what we're going to need to make it through the tough season. This is the funding that we lost. This is what you're able to speak to as the fundraising committee. Now let's sit down and figure out how to raise this money.
So you're active in supporting them, which is important. I know some folks don't want to help their boards be successful, even though the boards are professional and knowledgeable.
Yeah.
I've seen super talented board members when it comes to the fundraising go, whoa, I'm uncomfortable with that, right? And it's relationships. It's not that hard if they know what they're trying to accomplish.
But it's also transparency from the executive leadership of the organization.
To say what the situation is and what's needed,
Yeah.
which means you have to know what the situation is and what's needed. So you have to stay up on things.
You have to know how we serve, how we utilize our resources and our staff. For someone like me, I'm understaffed. I have 56 full-time employees and I'm understaffed, right? Which means every single role right now is critical. My warehouse team that keeps the baby boutique stocked and tagged and organized and cleaned. We call those ladies the golden girls. While they may not be client facing, if a board member tours and walks into that boutique and says, which most of them do, it smells amazing in here, it's beautiful in here, the racks are amazing. Somebody is pulling that off and making that happen. And so they have to understand the critical role of the warehouse workers who may not be dealing with clients every day, but their role is critical. And a board member will understand that when they have a true understanding of the organization and how we do what we do every single day.
I can tell you right now, I see many of the reasons why you've been so successful. You're very focused. Of course, you've got your business expertise behind you, but beyond that, you have a heart that just extends forever. And I can see why people come to you. You're approachable, but you're knowledgeable, and you're kind of just straightforward, like this is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And when all the tough stuff's flying through the air, it's nice to have someone stand up and say, hey, this is what we need to take care of right now. Just, it's a season. Focus on this.
It's a season, and we're dealing with a tough season ourselves. If you were paying attention in the news this week, nonprofits all over the country took a major hit with AmeriCorps, right? So when DOGE says, we don't need AmeriCorps, we don't need to keep funding that grant, what they don't understand is those members, those AmeriCorps members, are directly in the community, serving the community. And so nonprofits all over the country today, I've been on calls all morning, are scrambling because AmeriCorps members help us make up our workforce, right? And so we're able to reach more in the community with the AmeriCorps grant because they send members to our facility as trainees to help us serve the community. So we are all this week feeling it. But I can sit here and I can smile and I can tell you that we are strategizing on what to do next. I've been on calls all morning because closing your door is not the answer. It is a trickle effect. You have to strategize and re-strategize again on where to pull from so that you can keep everybody on board to keep serving the thousands of clients that depend on you monthly.
So I think I want to leave it there because that was inspirational, but also very directional, Thana. I would like to see if I can follow up with you in like 3 months and see where you're at.
Please do.
Because I have a feeling it'll be a different story.
It definitely will. And that's what my faith tells me. We are going to be all right. We're just in the dead of winter right now.
We need some good spring coming through.
We do.
Yes, we do. But I will follow up with you maybe summertime and see where things are and have a redo if you're up for it.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Nonprofits Today with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic nonprofit coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah and the Sandbox team at sarahbox.com. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible, so be sure to rate, review, and share this podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. And be sure to tune in and power up with future episodes of Nonprofits Today.